Thank you.
Thank you.
And now,
Our next speaker has more than 10 years of experience as QA. He started his career in the field from ground zero, from taking part in the Telerik Academy to becoming a principal QA engineer, trainer, and consultant at the heart of different innovation and automation initiatives. He has also developed and integrated multiple custom frameworks and tools, and is also main editor of Anton Angelov's books.
Nikolay Avramov is going to talk on one of the hottest topics nowadays, the need for speed, because everything we do, everything we test, and everything we develop requires the speed of lightning and the endurance of an elephant.
Please welcome Nikolay Avramov!
Avramov, what, please.
It's someone else.
Avramov.
Hey guys, thanks for the intro.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, let me just switch here, setup. Do we have it? Nice. All right, so my name is Nikolay Avramov, and I'm a developer in test and team lead at Automate the Planet. I'm also participating in Telerik Academy, where I actually started my career, and I'm a trainer in the QA Alpha track of it. About this talk, today I'm going to talk about performance testing, and I'm going to share my journey with it. Actually started at the very first day in Telerik, where one of the teammates on the dailies mentioned that he'll be doing some performance testing. I was very excited, wanted to know more, and asked him about it after that. But he was like, oh, this is not the thing you expect. I'm doing some SQL queries, and I have to performance test them. I was expecting to see some Visual Studio load tests to it. But over the time, I started working on a few projects related to performance, and I started to learn more about it, and it got more and more interesting. But years later, I learned the hard way what's the impact of performance on the actual customers. While I was working in Telerik, there was a little side project that a friend of mine offered to make, and it was about the mobile app, which was also my big passion at that time. So he was like, you know, we can try to make it. You know some stuff, I know some stuff, so we can try to do it, and we'll see how it comes up. It's great, and I knew about this platform. It was hybrid. You can just write JavaScript, HTML, and it works everywhere. So I thought we can do it. We started this project. It was an app similar to Tinder. I know no one knows about it. That's fine. And it was similar to Tinder, but it had different functionalities. And we started implementing it. I created a chat in it. There was some geofencing, some fancy stuff in it. And it was pretty cool. Until we got to the time when the product owner wanted to see it. And it's not the product owner you usually see with a tie and with cool suit. It was actually a big vodka guy from a local restaurant in Studentsky Grad. So the presentation was really exciting. He just picked the app, scrolled around it, clicked a few things, and said, "What's this crap? I hate it. I don't want it. Give me back my money." So he didn't throw it away because of the chat I made or the functionalities we had with geofencing and all of it. He just didn't like it because he didn't meet his expectations in performance and user feel. So I realized with the hard way how this affects the actual customers. Years later, after I joined Automate the Planet, I started preparing some trainings and workshops on the thematic. So everything got a little more clear, and I started getting feedback from the people what they see in performance testing, and realized that this is a term that's very undefined. You can get any kinds of answers when you ask people what performance is, and that's pretty normal. So in today's talk, I'm going to show you some of the top misconceptions I have seen, and we'll see if you agree or not with them. This is my take on this, so I'll be happy to get your opinion on all of that. The first misconception is about performance testing and load testing. What's the relation of them? And before I show you some results I took from the different sessions I had, I wanted to ask all of you to try and participate with raising hand, warm up a bit. I know you did it already, so let's ask first, how many of you were working on a performance testing project? Okay, we have one. All right, a couple here. This side, not many. Okay, we have a few. That's great. That's about 20 people, I think. Special, maybe it's time for performance. Challenge accepted. Okay, so please keep your hand up for just one more second. I want to ask you if this performance testing project was actually load testing project. Were you doing load testing while doing performance testing? Okay. That's about the same number of people. If you took their hands down, that's great. And this is something I was getting over the time also. I'm using some tool to generate these word clouds that I like a lot. But most of the people are saying when they hear performance testing, they talk about JMeter, about load runner, about stress testing, about how fast the system is, and stuff like that. So we can see that there's common understanding that performance testing is actually load testing. So I want to dig a bit into that, and we'll just see my favorite answer here. Yeah, you can see it on the top. Screams in agony. This is something I really enjoyed. All right, so to untangle this story, let's talk a bit about load testing. This is a typical load test that we can make using the tool that you probably know, JMeter. So we have some ramp-up period, we have period where we hold the load, and we have some time to cool down the system. This is a simple test I made against Automate the Planet. Tony, don't be mad at me. And this is the response I got. So on this graph, you can see the output of the system behavior. It's showing me what response I get for all these loads that I make, all these web requests that I made in my load test. But this graph is looking like a line, but it's actually made from little dots. These little dots are measurements. So these little dots are actually the performance tests that we make while load testing. So can we say that load testing is actually performance testing under load? The different metrics that we take and the different aspects of the system that we see by taking these metrics is actually performance testing. So this is just repeated over some load. Great. So why am I stressing so much on load testing and performance testing? What's the difference and so on? Well, because it matters. When you know what's the difference and that load testing is just a small part of the whole thing, you can realize that there are different types of performance testing you can make, and they will help you to understand the system better. So, we get to the next misconception. Is performance testing always going with load testing? We saw the numbers from the audience. Most of the cases, that's the case. But one day, our manager in the project I worked just said on one of the sync meetings, you know what? We have this small project going on. It's about converting the 2,500 pages that we have in our application into a single page. That was interesting. So they are trying to get this huge application into a single page application. Do you know what single page application is? Can you raise hand? Okay, you have seen it a while. So doing this on a small marketing website is a piece of cake. Challenge accepted website is also built like that. So doing it on a huge system with so many pages is not so straightforward. And I realized that we have to measure it somehow. Would it work in general? Do we have to do it at all? So I started thinking, I have my JMeter. It's installed, I have it on my machine. I have to use it. I know how to do it. But how do I measure the performance of SPA system versus multi-page system? How do I measure the user's interaction over some scenarios that we have? It's pretty hard to do it, to simulate exactly the conditions and to be sure that the actual results are the same that the clients will see. It's easy to miss that because by doing wrong measurements, you can mislead the project management and take the project into another direction. So it's a risky job. And then I started working with my friend. Say hello to web page test. Yesterday on the dev conference, there was a great talk that was using some of the charts that web page test generates. And it was surprising to me to see other people use it. But yeah, it's called the Swiss Army knife in performance testing, especially for website performance. So there are a few things that I use from it to help me in such a project. First thing is to start a performance test and to actually see the results. It's taking some time to run it. You can run it from many locations from around the globe, but the result that we get is similar to what we see in Chrome DevTools, and it's the waterfall, which you'll see in a second. Waterfalls are something I discovered a few years ago. I have seen it quite a while, but understanding the waterfalls and how they work and what information we can take from them is really interesting to me and to many web performance engineers. So the waterfall that we see here is showing us the first request to automate the planet. It might be a little small. I can try to zoom it in. And it's taking about 1 second to load. That's perfectly fine. Then we have a bunch of requests that are happening that are marked with X, which cannot be good. Then we have some other requests, and we can see the whole page load. The vertical lines that we see are showing actually at what point of time our page has loaded. So this is so important information before we start any kind of performance tests. Why? Well, because if we just focus on the first request, which is automatetheplanet.com, and do load test on it, we might get some results. But let's see what happens when this request finishes. So it's around the first second, and we can see on the video here, which doesn't want to play. Okay, now it played. We can see that on the first second, the user is not seeing anything. It's just a blank screen. So when we do load tests on this endpoint, what information do we get? We know what's the server response time. It's 1 second. That's great. I can share it to the product team and to everyone else, but it won't help us to compare it to the actual numbers we get from our browser. So I started exploring this and digging deeper into these waterfalls to understand what they mean and how they can be used. Another very useful feature I use is called web requests. The web requests are very interesting to see. This is an open source system that is applying some physics on our web requests. By opening this, you can see how the actual system is built, what are the different components and how they're affecting the page load time. How do we see it? Well, each of the requests that we have is marked here as a little planet or a circle. The size of it is showing the size of the request, and the actual distance between the different requests is showing the page load time and the response times. So having this picture is very different from doing a page load and from looking at the waterfall, but it's helping us a lot to get insights about the page performance. Now, having that information, we can analyze and decide what requests to use and how to design our testing. But we get to the next misconception. Performance testing is all about speed, and mostly server response time. This is something that we track over most of the performance tests, and we can see it on many of the performance tests and load tests that people are doing. But this is just about this. There's something called perceived performance, and this is a very interesting topic to me. In perceived performance, we start to change the measurements we make from server response time, from throughput, and other metrics that we usually do in load testing to stuff like first paint, first contentful paint, or FCP, meaningful paint, contentful paint, speed index, time to interactive. All these measurements, as we know, and they're saying enough for themselves, are very important for our users. And when you start measuring this, you can actually call this a test. So you can set baselines and try to improve it. So in performance testing, we definitely need load testing, and we need to see how our system reacts in load test. But we also need to take care of that experience user gets when he loads the page, whether the page is optimized enough to get really good experience and how it feels. So there are different tools about that. We'll talk about it in a second. Cool, so we get to the next misconception I see. This is about doing performance testing only at the end of the project, just before the release. Can we just raise hand again to say how many of you are doing performance testing just before the release? All right. Cool, that's about the half of the people that are doing performance testing. And that's pretty common. We tend to try to run it like a regression suite to make sure that system is working correctly, we don't have any load times that are higher. But doing performance testing just at the end of the project or the conclusion of system functional testing is like conducting a diagnosis blood test on a patient who's already dead. This is a quote by Scott Barber, and I really like it. So you can just say what's the current condition, but you don't have really that information. How can you do this prevention of being dead if you just do your testing at the end of the project? Taking snapshots over the course of the project, even before it's released, is critical, and we can also always find a way to do it, even though it's a little bit harder, because there might be unfinished parts of it. Now let's imagine one situation. What if you're a developer and you start working on this new project? You start developing your code, but there's something that is new. There's a problem you need to solve, and you try to find a solution for it. Then you start to think about new solutions to it, Google it, Stack Overflow, and then you find this new solution. That's great. You try it and it works. You pass it on to testing, everything is fine. Then you do it again about this different problem you have, you use the same thing, and then again. And then it comes time for release. The QA team starts running their performance and load tests, and they see that there's a problem. There's a bottleneck introduced, probably with that new implementation. Going back and fixing all these places where the problem was introduced is very risky for introducing regression issues and we have to retest everything. So this puts the project at risk. What's the best way to do it? I'm not saying it's the best, but I'll show you how they do it at Netflix. There's a great article about it. They do multiple performance test executions before and after each commit gets into their branches. So even before we release something, we get these performance metrics from the change that we introduce. And we can compare, based on the trend that we have, whether it's anomaly that we see, does it change the performance of the system, even though it might not be a bad thing, but we need that information to know what change is changing what. The only way to do it is to do that frequently by having some process in place. Performance testing cannot be done on production. Performance testing and production are two things that should not be used in the same sentence. This is because most of the people think about load testing when they say performance. And indeed, load testing on production is not a good thing. But are all performance testing types forbidden from running on production? These are just some of the tools that you can use to run your tests on production, and they're very useful. Web page test, page speed insights, KeyCD and pingdom, all of these are doing just single load on their page. You don't have to load the system, you will not break anything. But you get that insight from the source of truth, which is on the production server. It's not scaled down production, so you can start tracking that, and it's really a good thing to do it. This is an example that we have for a memory leak that we found. It was not in production, but it was interesting to see that the tool that we use is not so fancy. It's just from DevTools. You have your performance monitor, you can start it, you can see what metrics you can measure, and learn how to use it in the best way. Okay, this is a video of this performance leak happening. I'll just move that a bit up. But we can see that it got around 2 gigs of memory. And you can notice that this is not on the server. This is not happening on our database or something else. It's happening in the browser, especially in a single page application, React applications. There are so many things going on in the browser that we might have multiple performance issues there. So taking care of those cannot be done with the general tools that we use for load testing. Next we get to the 6th misconception. Performance testing is hard. How many of you think performance testing is hard? Can you raise hand? All right, not many of you, that's great. The rest, I guess, think it's easy. Actually, this is pretty true. Performance testing is really challenging, and it's one of those types of testing that is not strictly defined, as we said, and we don't have so strict criteria around it. This is an example of a process for running load tests. It has about 10 steps, and with the tools that we know, pretty much anyone with some API experience can just take a request, repeat it tons of times, and see some graphs, present them. Job is done. This is great, but the hardest part I found is in number 7, to prepare and to understand your environment. This is the time when you have to start thinking about the system. What do you have to prepare as a test case, how it would affect it, and you have to understand the technology behind it. This is pretty hard to get, so there might be so many different functionalities, different features that are there. Question is, can we do it as a QAs? It might be microservices, it could be so many different technologies. Do we have to understand from everything? And if we switch to another project, is that something new that we have to start learning and read all the books about it? That's something I found over the past few months. This is pretty hard. And to know all the answers and to have the expectations in the team that you can do it all by yourself is really a misconception. Why? Because performance is like a rocket and our system is like a rocket. You have to know about the different components, or you can find the people that know about it. So in this latest project that we had, we were looking for a bottleneck in the database. It was something like a deadlock happening because of the Redis cache did something that it shouldn't. I don't know about it. Like, I'm not so aware of the technical side of it in this case. But I found that the skills that we develop as QAs over time to try to channel everyone's energy towards the solving of the problem, to get everyone's opinion on what we have, and to try to structure the whole activity as a general testing activity to prepare requirements, entry and exit criteria is really helping a lot. So even though the topic is hard and it's hard to know everything, we can do that as QAs and try to use our skills in this really challenging matter. Performance testing should be done only on the software under test. Misconception number 8. That's the main thing that we should do. But how about the software we develop ourselves? How many of you develop software? A few people. How many of you write automated tests? So, you also write software, you code. How about testing our own code about performance? We try to do it at Automate the Planet. Anton has a great article about it for benchmarking and assessing automated test components. We tried it a few times when triggering some change that is really important, and it's using different implementation of the same function. This really works great when you have confidence that the software you deliver is also performant as it should. Next one. Performance improvements are only verified with performance testing, and this is my favorite one. At first, I also thought that when you're involved into performance testing, you should care only about your performance tests. In a project that we had recently, the one with the SPA application, we saw that's not really true. The main thing there was our regression suite. And our automation suite is so significant and was a huge part of this project because it helped us to find so many issues over the course of the project while the team was working on performance improvements. Performance testing came at a later point. We of course did some measurements and checks, but the main thing was this: is our software working correctly? Because no one likes really blazingly fast error pages. So no matter what shape of your pyramid is it a pyramid, is it a mushroom, what kind of it, you should make sure that you have it before starting and working on performance projects. Is performance testing all about the numbers? There are so many graphs, there are so many numbers involved in it, but is it all about it? We have to start thinking about these little dots that we see on the graphs. Each of them is representing one of our users. And even if it's a bit higher or lower, we have to investigate. And the way to do it is to start thinking about the client side. So start thinking about it so you don't see that and our customers don't see that too often. Key takeaways from today. Do not solely rely on load testing. And while testing the performance of a website, work with your team. Define your own type of performance testing. Share it with everyone, get feedback on it, start drafting on performance testing plan, and before you start working on performance improvements, make sure you have your regression suite done right. This is just as an example because I did say a few things not to do, but I'll give you some example of how to do it. This is example infrastructure that you can use for your real user monitoring infrastructure, and you can apply to pretty much any system on production. The other part, the synthetic part for the infrastructure, you can use to create your own lab of performance testing, which combines all of these different aspects. It's client-side performance testing, load testing, some key measurements from page speed insights, and gathering all of this together with some alerting. Luckily for you, this is all available in my GitHub, so you can check it out, install it in Docker, and have it on your next day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikolay.
Any questions to Nikolay Avramov?
You got it right this time.
Any questions?
Okay, I'll be around, so you can contact me anytime. Thank you.
Please send him with big and round and warm applause. Nikolay
Avramov!
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.